you today on this very special web seminar, one in a series of 3 seminars that we are doing in conjunction with our partners, Alibaba. So let's just take a quick look at the sessions that we're going to be holding. Today's session is all about the China landscape and the Chinese consumers. The second session, which is on Wednesday, the 30th of September, is all going to be about a rapid immersion in the Alibaba ecosystem, so you can really understand what's there and how you can use it. And the third session is going to be about the new phenomena of live streaming and brand building in China. So on behalf of myself, David Roth of WPP, and David Lloyd from Alibaba, a very warm welcome and thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, it goes without saying what a year it's been. I don't think if we wanted to have created our own stress test for brands and companies and e-commerce and platforms, we would have, in our wildest dreams, have thought about a global pandemic that has impacted every aspect of our lives and our customers' lives right across the globe. The thing that's most interesting at the moment is when you look for where growth is going to occur over the course of the next few months and indeed probably the next couple of years, the greatest amount of growth is going to occur still in Asia and still in China. So it's very important to understand what the opportunities are for all of us within the Asia and in specifically the China space. So in the next 60 minutes, this is going to be a very fast-paced 60 minutes covering a lot of content. We're going to look at China in context, the digital China, the impact that COVID has had in China, and the key Chinese trends for consumers in a post-COVID era that you really must know and understand in order to take advantage of the growth opportunities that will be there over the course of the next couple of years. I'm very glad now to be joined by Gordon Orr. Gordon is the former chairman and head of McKinsey's in Asia, and is also the non-executive director for a number of companies in China, including Lenovo and also Squire Pacific. Gordon, thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Welcome, great to be here.
Well, let's bring us up to date, Gordon, literally up to date. The political sort of mood music between sort of China and the US over the past few months is sort of getting significantly louder. Is this something that companies who are thinking of doing business with China in sort of a cross-border trade perspective should be remotely concerned about?
Dave, I think the short answer has to be absolutely yes, because there's just risks that these tensions can lead to, as we've seen, tariffs, discontinuities in supply chain and partnerships, market access, and even what we've seen in the recent weeks on payments. But it can also create new opportunities, and the answer is very industry specific. If you peel it all back, with the US is driving in many ways the securitization of a national security lens of what's historically been an economic relationship, putting pressure on 5 cross-border flows of goods, capital, people, data, and technology. Export licenses required for technologies, both from the US and from China these days. Data localization, as we've seen with TikTok, as we've seen over the last year or so with China. On people flows, just to give you one example, my understanding is in July that the US consulates in mainland China only issued 4 F1 visas for Chinese students to go to the US this year. Last year, they issued 20,000. So clearly, there's a coming apart on each of these dimensions that has probably more impact on technology than any other sector, but we have to be aware of it because potentially our partners, our channel, people we work with, people we source from, can end up on some of these lists that mean we can no longer continue to work with them as we had before. There's the Hong Kong related pressure where you've got the For business, the challenge of navigating the Chinese national security law and the US Hong Kong Autonomy Act and finding ways of being compliant with both. So net, increased volatility, increased uncertainty, making investments in infrastructure, making investments in people on the ground, perhaps seen as high risk. But as you and I know, being bold at times like this can actually have massive payoffs, because let's not lose sight of China's economy is growing. It will probably be more than 100% of global GDP growth this year will come from China. China's consumers, especially the wealthy consumers, are spending again. And without international travel, that spend is focused within China. And importantly, there's no generic bias in China against multinationals or companies of any specific nationality. Consumers are more sophisticated than that.
And you're a real seasoned both strategist and also have a great understanding of China. When you look at the next few years, and you talked about China being 100% of GDP growth, probably in a very extraordinary year, but looking out, next year, 2, 3, 5 years time, do you still see China being, the place to look to for continued and sustained growth?
Absolutely, I do. That's my base case, and I think it should be all of our base case that the outperformance of the Chinese economy relative to the rest of the world is going to continue in the years ahead. Where those big opportunities are, some we can identify now, some are going to be shown to us, I think, more clearly when the Chinese 14th five-year plan and the implementation of this new dual circulation strategy comes out over the next few months. Yes, there's going to be intense competition to reach the consumer, but the absolute size of the consumer market is clearly going to grow rapidly. That's going to be the direction of travel of central government policy. It's the direction of travel of the consumer themselves. And I think, therefore, that for international brands that address consumers, that communicate something and have something distinctive to say, whether it's traditional luxury and auto, mass consumer brands, or increasingly in service sectors, in healthcare, theme parks, financial services, brands that we don't traditionally perhaps associate with reaching the Chinese consumer. Those opportunities over the next 3 to 5 years are going to be really going through the inflection point that we've seen in other sectors in the past. Those Western brands will be able to access and sell to, smart, informed, digital Chinese consumers. They deliver trust, performance, sustainability, and value. There's going to be opportunities even in niches, because the size of the niche in China.
Well, yes, in China, a niche is several million.
Exactly, it's bigger than your average European mid-sized country. So.
Now, I think it was pretty much McKinsey's that brought focus to the world of the 500 million or so Chinese who are going to become middle class over the course of the next few years, and that sort of process started a number of years ago. Do you see any slowdown in the growth of the middle class in China as a result of what we're seeing in the last few months?
There was definitely a pause, and I think overall we're back on trend at this point. Certainly there's a number of the malls that I know, the chain malls that I know very well in China. August performance was 25% up year on year, and the service side of things, I'm on the board of Meituan, and clearly that all of our service lines are ahead of where they were last year. So I think we saw a recovery from wealthier Chinese consumers more quickly than we did from the mass Chinese consumer. But even the mass consumer now is feeling that more confident that they can switch back from saving to spending.
Now, you've also spent a lot of time advising companies, organizations about the way in which they structure themselves to be able to cope with the fast pace of China speed, but also to enable them to succeed in China. What advice would you give to people who are listening to this, who are thinking of entering China or putting their foot on the accelerator on China, from a sort of a using platforms such as Alibaba's in terms of the organization of the internal organization to make sure that it's successful. Because sometimes, obviously, it's as much how you organize yourself internally as it is to what you do from a market-facing perspective.
Sure, it's a challenge not to be specific enough here, but look, there's a few prerequisites up front. Make sure that what you're going to sell in China, you've registered your brands, you've registered your IP, you've got all that in place. Because while the platform is responsible for ensuring that there's no fakes, and clearly Ali and all platforms take that responsibility increasingly seriously these days, they can't help you if you haven't registered what you're bringing to China in terms of the brand. Focus on what matters to you, where you can be distinctive, and let people who know payments, customs, taxes, logistics, returns in China better than you focus on that. Make sure that you get onto the right sub-platforms and communities, the right social media, thinking through that the coming to China, I think, humbly, with the expectation that things will be fundamentally different if you're coming for the first time. And I think particularly that's a challenge for the capabilities in your marketing insights team of getting insights and understanding from China and not relying on expertise and case examples of what's worked in other places. And I think if I was to make just one final point there, make sure when I say, get marketing insights on mainland China from mainland China, not from Hong Kong. Some of the poorest China strategies that I've seen over time have come from Hong Kong businesses trying to do business operates in China. It's almost like being too close to see the differences. And China is clearly the world's most dynamic digital society, and Hong Kong, frankly, is one of the probably bottom quartile of developed economies.
Surely not.
So I think there's this. I mean, Jack will talk to this more specifically, but I think there's finding trusted partners and working with them is the key to being successful in developing cross-border business in China. You're not setting yourself up to be the expert on everything, but you are setting yourself up to be an expert on finding a trusted partner.
Well, Gordon, always a delight and a privilege to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Much appreciated. Well, thank you very much indeed, Gordon. And we will come back to speak with Jack, as Gordon mentioned, a little bit later on in this session. Well, to help us again on some of the context of what's going on at the moment, this is the graph that really shows you what's happened to quarterly real GDP growth in China over the course of the last few years, decade from 92. And here you can see, I suppose, the growth and the success story that China has had in terms of GDP. And of course, the big GDP decline that China suffered at the beginning of the COVID epidemic. But as we can see, China is very much bouncing back. And an indication of that is looking at the key China shopping festivals. And there was a shopping festival relatively recently, 618, so that's the 18th of June, where actually this year overall sales across the various different channels was around 30% up year on year. So a good indication that the Chinese consumers are back and they're back spending. I want to spend a few minutes looking at digital China, because as Gordon just said, China is the most digitally savvy nation in the world, and the consumers very much are the most digital consumers on the planet. And just to give you some sort of feel for the scale of the amount of people, this is in millions, who are using some of the big Chinese social media platforms or communication platforms, you can see that this is something that is not niche, even in a China sense. It's certainly not niche. This is very much mainstream. And social networks and social channels are very much ingrained in the everyday lives of almost all consumers now in China. And here you can see just the growth of e-commerce sales, digital sales in China from 2013 to 2000, what the predictions for 2020. A staggering growth rate, but also staggering in terms of the absolute number of thousands of billions of dollars, and compare that to, sort of North America, and compare that to Europe. This is very much a digital e-commerce, great relationship between online and offline, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well. And also to give you a feel, and I'm sure all of you have heard about 11/11 or Singles Day, or what's now the global shopping festival that was created by Alibaba, created by Jack Ma, and implemented by Daniel, who's now the chairman, chief executive of Alibaba. And you can see that these are not sales over a year, these are sales over just a 24-hour period. So going from 2009 to $0.1 billion US to 2019, $38.4 billion US in a single day. And if you compare that obviously to Black Friday and Cyber Monday, including Small Business Saturday and Super Sunday, it dwarfs all of those combined in terms of one day's sales. One of the other areas that you need to know about, and this, like all of these things, these are our sessions in their own right. We're just covering the surface, and there's lots more detail that we can go into if you'd like us to at a later stage. But this is looking at the social commerce sales in China, where it is at the moment, the growth that we have seen, which has been absolutely spectacular, and the forecast for 2020 and for 2021. I think one of the key things that we've learned about social commerce sales in China is the advantage that China has in terms of the seamless nature of being able to go from an individual, a live streamer, whoever it is, recommending a product, to purchasing it immediately and without any friction at all. And clearly that's done via channels and exchanges like Alipay from Alibaba as well. Now, the Chinese consumers are also very, very fast consumers and adopters of new technologies. And I just want to give you just one example of that, and that is in the area of smart speakers. I know we're seeing a good growth of smart speakers here in Europe and also in the USA, but I want to give you a feel for what's happening in the smart speaker market in China. T-Mobile they have a product called Genie. It's China's most popular smart speaker. It's connected to about 200, well, probably now maybe 250, maybe 260 million home appliances from about 900 brands, and about just sort of 3 million units were sold in the last quarter in 2019. Over the 2019 Global Shopping Festival, through smart speakers, we can start to see now the growth of voice-enabled commerce. So 810,000 eggs were purchased, 1.4 million tons of rice, 76 tons of liquid detergent, over 1 million orders placed for and paid for via the Tmall Genie voice system during 11/11. So again, we can see that the Chinese consumers are very fast and quick adopters of new technologies, new ways of doing things, new ways of buying things, and are very open to the way in which these things are done. And therefore, if you want to be able to communicate and do well in China, you need to understand these technologies and enable them for your products and services. I want to talk just briefly about the sort of, I suppose, how COVID has influenced and shaped some of the Chinese values and attitudes and behaviors over the course of the last 6 months or so. This is just looking at, it's Kantar's global COVID-19 barometer, looking at the China data, and just looking at the top lists of behavior. Some of these are behavioral changes, things people will do more, but eating healthier, increased overall hygiene, much more online shopping, even more than they currently do, finding especially in the older age group in China, who certainly for fresh food were not great online shoppers, using that significantly now. Spending time with the people in my household, I suppose people didn't have much choice in doing that as well, but also increase in social media usage as well. But you might find it surprising to know that also top on the agenda now of Chinese consumers are products and services that are environmentally friendly and environmentally responsible. And we've seen a growth in the number of people who believe that now in a post sort of COVID pandemic environment, having products that, or buying products that are more environmentally friendly and services as well is phenomenally important to them as well. And here is just an example of the sorts of things that consumers in China are very much looking forward to doing once the pandemic subsides. One of them, the biggest, is travel. There's a massive, great big travel opportunity, meeting friends, going shopping. So the whole, back to the things people were doing before, going to restaurants, pubs, clubs, etc., theatres, and 23% are very much looking forward to travelling abroad again. And obviously the Chinese consumer abroad, we talk about obviously the opportunities for non-Chinese brands inside of China, but there's also has been a lot of opportunities for brands outside of China to benefit from the growth of Chinese tourism. And that's something that also has to be nurtured as well when that starts to come back. We've also seen some priorities of consumers sort of shift a little bit post-pandemic, not massive, great big shifts, as you can see from here, but I think there are a couple of interesting ones to pull out. The first is an increase in patriotism and the role that the Chinese government and Chinese society has played in navigating through the pandemic, and also things like sort of beauty and having fun. And I think that's also very instructive for the type of brands and products and services that the Chinese consumers are looking for now, and the opportunities for them during the various different holiday periods of products and services that you may well have. I want to spend just a little bit of time before we speak to Jack to look at some of the key, I suppose, what I would call the yin and yang of trends impacting Chinese consumers at the moment. And I would say that these are definitely trends that you need to know, be aware of, think about them in terms of your product, your service, your offer, your proposition, how that can be course change corrected in order to appeal to a Chinese audience. Now, like everything, these are probably half an hour sessions in their own right. I'm just going to touch on them very briefly, and please feel free to contact me or any of the Alibaba team if you want any more specific details on all of this. I think the first one is this whole sort of relationship between doing things that are healthy, buying products that are healthy, products that are good for your family, good for the environment, and also being quite indulgent at the same time. So there are opportunities very much on the health sector. As Gordon was saying, there are great opportunities in the indulgence, getting pleasure, rewarding yourselves. And clearly the growth of the middle class consumers has driven affluence, and also that sort of driver of affluence has driven sort of competing needs, the requirement for better healthcare, looking after yourself, looking after your family, and also the requirement for a little bit of joy, indulgence, being a bit frivolous, and spending in those areas as well. The other dichotomy, I suppose, is old versus new. And we're seeing a resurgence of some old Chinese brands that have been, some of them have been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years, finding a new relevance, a new renaissance in the patriotism of younger Chinese consumers as well. Also versus new, a great appetite for new brands, new experiences, things that other people haven't tried, new products and services from outside of China. And it's now very much a relationship between both of those. So what we're seeing is new brands are definitely emerging, new Chinese brands, but also Western brands coming into China. And we're seeing old brands resurge as well. There's also, I suppose, an interesting relationship between sort of pride and pragmatism. For pride, I suppose one might even say sort of showing off, using brands. Status is very much a weapon in China, and brands, I suppose, are a piece of the ammunition of that. Also versus now a tremendous pragmatism. I've been lucky enough to work in China, live in China, understand China as much as it's possible to do without, I suppose, having been born and brought up there. But the Chinese are probably the most sophisticated consumers now in the world, having gone from having no choice to abundant choice, having not been consumers to most sophisticated in a very short period of time. And they really do understand what value is all about. So being able to work out and understand what your value proposition is unbelievably important now for this sort of balancing in the relationship now between feeling pride about maybe some of the luxury products that you've bought or use versus the pragmatism of being able to talk to people about how you have got amazing and tremendous value out of the purchases that you've made. And that's probably one of the reasons why we see things like buying clubs, people getting together to do bulk purchases, grow in strength as well. Now, we look at China and we look at the young consumers versus the elder consumers. And when you look at the experiences that consumers of 80 and 90 and older in China have had, what they've been through, the various different experiences over the transformation of China versus the younger consumers, the sort of 20-year-olds, maybe 30-year-olds, who've experienced nothing but transformation, growth, GDP growth, opportunities. And therefore, of course, it's always very attractive to think of the young consumers as being the market you need to go to and look at. But the elder consumers are also phenomenally important, and both in terms of size, young and old are very large consumer bases, and both are very, very important. So we're seeing more and more marketers targeting both the Gen Z consumers and also the grandparents as well. And it's important to be able to market on both those dimensions. We're also seeing, I suppose, this notion of faster versus slower. I mean, clearly material wealth, the growth of the middle classes, the increase in GDP growth has created consumers who have consistently over the course of the last maybe 10 years, maybe even 15 years, felt sort of wealthier and wealthier each year. Obviously, this year has caused a shock to the system in China as it has elsewhere as well. But it's also, I suppose, produced time poverty. Consumers, middle-class Chinese work phenomenally hard. They do very long hours from very early morning till late at the night in terms of working, and a number of them working at weekends as well. So whilst there's quite a lot of, in a sense, disposable income now, people have got less and less time to do things with it. So it's very important that you respect the time that your consumers have in order to ensure that your product service proposition reduces the amount of friction and the amount of time that's involved in doing that. Then I suppose there's trading up and trading down. I suppose that's nothing too different from what we've seen right across the world, where the mid-market is the area that's suffering the most. People, China having more disposable income and trading up to more premium products. And if you look at the FMCG market, this last 6 months notwithstanding, we've seen over the course of the last 3 to 4 years that the growth has very much come from the premium end of the FMCG market. The value end had a resurgence over the course of the last few months. But also we're seeing two things. One, people are trading up, and the other people that are trading down as well. So shoppers, the same shopper, the same consumer is both seeking a bargain at the same time and also is looking for premium products. So again, when you look at your product and your service, look at thinking about, where does it lie? Is it a a value end of the spectrum? Is it a premium end of the spectrum? And if it's a premium end of the spectrum, then it absolutely must still have a phenomenally great value proposition, because as I said earlier, the Chinese consumer is very, very value conscious, not necessarily cheap conscious, but value conscious, and is looking for value in most of the products as well. Now, we've seen, as China's opened up over the last 30 years, the emergence of lots of what I suppose one could call foreign brands in China, in pretty much every single product category, and some of those have done exceptionally well. But I suppose I would say over the course of the last 7 or 8 years, Chinese brands in lots of those sectors have significantly improved their game. They've begun to understand much better the magic art of marketing and branding and added value, and are giving some of the foreign brands who are well established in China a good run for their money. And as we see Chinese brands emerge and take their place, not just in China, but also some of those Chinese brands across the world, we are now seeing foreign brands rebound. They had a little bit of a tough time in the course of the last 3 years, but last year we started to really start to see foreign brands significantly re-emerge. And they've done a lot of work in sharpening up their value proposition, in moving their innovation centers into China so they can respond much faster to the changing needs of the Chinese consumer and produce products that are absolutely right from China, not necessarily a product that's fantastic in America or Europe that they think might be able to sell in China. And then, of course, there is, I suppose, retail versus new retail. New retail, very much a phrase coined by Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba, and very much being realized by the new chairman and chief executive, Daniel. The notion of new retail is just the seamless linking, I suppose, between the online and offline, no real distinction between them, a seamless digitization of the entire supply chain. And we are beginning to see the rewards of being able to do that. No better example over the course of the last 6 or 7 months, when obviously digitization and e-commerce, home delivery, digital supply chains proved absolutely vital in supplying right across China. And I suppose the intrigue, really, the interest in China is this relationship between both the physical and the virtual in terms of new retail. Not one necessarily is better than the other. Well, I hope that's given you an overview of some of the key sort of areas that are impacting consumer changes and trends. As I say, each of these deserves a session in its own right, but I hope we've given you a good insight that will start to spur your thinking and to think in relation to the products and services you potentially could offer. Well, now I'd like to introduce Jack Porteous, who is the Chief Client Officer from the Samarkand Group Global. Jack, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. Can you see me and hear me all right?
I can see you and hear you all right. So we'll assume everybody else can, Jack. If not, we have a nice conversation amongst ourselves. First of all, Jack, you spent many years, you're again a China expert, spent many years also working for the China-Britain Council. So you have a very interesting perspective of companies, organizations that have tested the water in China, and a number of those have been absolutely highly, amazingly successful. So just tell us first of all a little bit about what you at Samarkand Global do to help companies succeed in the fast growing area now of cross-border trade into China.
Thanks, David. And also, thank you for having me on today. And it's been really interesting listening to both your thoughts and Gordon's thoughts from earlier as well. And I think you've kind of provided an excellent insight. As you said, there were so many topics there that could have taken an entire hour on their own to discuss. But I think you've pretty much hit all of the big ones there. At Samarkand Global, we're a fairly young company. We're about 4 years old, but we're a UK-based cross-border e-commerce specialist focused on the Chinese market. So I head up the client services team here in the UK, but we're in total about 90 people. We are about 45 in the UK, and then the same over in China, mainly based in Shanghai. Our mission as a company fundamentally is to try to make selling to China as easy as selling through your own .com website. We want to make it simple, accessible, and profitable for Western brands to have access to the e-commerce opportunity in China. And we offer a kind of a range of products from light touch software as a service SaaS product that plugs straight into your .com website to facilitate trade with Chinese consumers who are landing there, through to managed TP services to launch stores on platforms like Tmall Global, and quite a few things in between.
Now, are you finding that more and more companies are choosing to use, I suppose, the new cross-border opportunities like Tmall Global to dip their toe into the water or even accelerate their strategies rather than landing in China with a team of 100 people and trying to work it out on the ground?
Well, I think it's been a challenging time over the last few months for a number of companies because of the unprecedented scale of the crisis that we're facing as a planet, and one of the real challenges is the restrictions on international travel. And there aren't many companies out there who haven't, who currently have 0 people in China who would want to plonk a team of 100, 200 people out there without sending people from their own entity as well to go and kind of guide that and have a good flow of information between the two. So I think that's somewhere where we're kind of, we fill that gap because of our teams split between the UK and China. We kind of internalize that struggle a little bit for brands, but it's a difficult time to open up a new market and open up a new opportunity, and that makes cross-border e-commerce a really perfect way of doing that. You don't need to have on-the-ground distribution. There's far less regulation, so it's a much easier way of testing the market as a new entrant, or for testing new products, new ideas through these channels if you're already established in market but want to branch out into new areas. And it's still growing incredibly fast as a segment.
Now, we saw the numbers for the last shopping festival, the big shopping festival took place, 6/18. It was very much, I suppose, we're all looking at the numbers for that. It's very much a litmus test of the recovery in China and the Chinese consumers. Obviously, through your cross-border operations, looking at live sales over that period. What did you see?
So one of your earlier slides had the new top priorities of Chinese consumers as eating healthier, increasing their personal hygiene, and online shopping. And we are fortunate to be a company that is e-commerce specialist and who mainly trade in nutritional supplements and beauty and personal care products. So we've kind of had a fairly easier time of it, I think, than some people over the last few months. But June was our record month for sales to China.
Period. I mean, the whole record month ever.
Record month of sales ever in the history of the company. So we really benefited from what some people termed as kind of revenge spending for a few months of lockdown and all this pent up demand and people wanting to kind of go out and feel good and treat themselves. And one of your other slides really spoke about the kind of practical versus affordable versus luxury kind of dichotomy as well that's going on, and we didn't see any suppressed demand for some of our super luxury skincare brands where it can be £500 for 50 mils of face cream. from the top tier from the consumers in the top tier cities, and we also saw an increasing demand for quality imported products from kind of consumers with less disposable income but still wanting to access kind of masstige or the more kind of accessible imported market. A couple of kind of key things that we saw from 618. So people were still being a little bit cautious about what sectors they were spending on and what kind of product segments. So health supplements and skincare both did very well, things that you can do at home and that affect your general health and well-being. Cosmetics hadn't quite picked up, color cosmetics, things that are more about going out, hadn't quite picked up to the same extent. In terms of our kind of customer base, we had about 40% new customers in June versus 60% returning, but 80% of our sales came from the returning customers. So they're much higher value. And we see that kind of consistently, that people are a little cautious with their first purchase, but then once they get to know the brand and like it, they'll come back and spend more money. And
so it is worth investing in that first purchase, because that's sort of, if the brand delivers its promise, that's, from your experience, that sort of results in a loyal and returning customer.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that, Alibaba and Tmall are famous for is creating in brands with a hero product, a hero SKU. And what we really try and do is use the amazing potential of those hero SKUs to get consumers interested in other products from the range. So alongside kind of your standard discounting tactics, we'll offer gift with purchase, free samples, sachets, to introduce people to the wider range of products beyond just the one hero SKU. And that's how you create the higher value, long-term returning consumers. The other thing that we saw that you mentioned as well is the social commerce and the real kind of uplift and drive of social commerce. And I think that was something that was already happening pre-COVID and pre-lockdown, but online shopping as a form of entertainment is, absolutely the thing in China, and it is the national pastime is online shopping. So we really saw the social commerce sales through KOL channels, through Taobao resellers, through people who have established audiences with a set of consumers where their opinion is trusted. That really grew incredibly fast for us and has done over the last 6 months.
Well, if any of you are confused by any of those terminologies, not quite certain how it all works, that's all going to be explained to you in the third session. And we're going to do a real deep dive into the social networks, the key opinion leaders, which is what a KOL is all about, and also how live stream works. Jack, before you go, just two things. Yep. One of them is you sell, in a sense, cross-border right across China. People have been long talked about Beijing and Shanghai and Shenzhen as these, what I suppose now being called first-tier cities, or been called first-tier cities for a long time. We're seeing an emergence of what has been called third, fourth, fifth-tier cities. What's your advice to people about, should you be taking third, fourth, fifth-tier cities really seriously now?
I would say, like with any market, you have to do your research before you kind of jump straight in. If your idea that third, fourth, fifth-tier cities are growing fast because they have made up over 50% of the value of e-commerce in China since 2017, and that's your only data point, then you might not succeed. It's going to be a bit of a lottery. But there is a really valuable customer there who is looking for imported products. Typically, it's a slightly lower price point. There is less disposable income in those cities because they're less wealthy. There's less ultra-rich individuals in those places. So it depends what category in and what. Yeah.
I mean, it sort of swings around about as well, because in those cities the cost of living, housing, whatever, is less, and people have potentially a more disposable income.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are there is a sweet spot. So I think an interesting stat from Douyin, which is the TikTok app brand in China, was that in 2019 their top 3 cities for the number of videos watched were Chongqing, Chengdu, and Xi'an. They are not third-tier cities; they're second-tier cities. But they're
not Shanghai, Beijing, and Shenzhen. That's for sure.
No. So the average user in Chongqing watched 4 times the amount of videos as a user in Beijing.
Finally, Jack, we are fast approaching the magic 11:11.
Uh-huh.
11/11/2020. What's your prediction?
Easiest prediction I'll ever make is that it's going to be the biggest 11/11 ever, because that's how it works, and every year it gets bigger and better. My kind of it's not so much a prediction, but I think it's something that's worth highlighting to brands who maybe, or people on this call who haven't done 11/11 before. The fact that we call it 11/11 after the 11th of November is slightly misleading, because actually the period of time that the sale goes on for is much, and actually all of the hard work really is done in the 2 weeks before Double 11. So my other prediction is that it's going to go on for longer than it ever has done before, because every year it adds a couple of days of kind of pre-promotion and pre-live streaming promotion and all this stuff at the start. But if you want any evidence that 11/11, the hard work is done before, look at the sales in the first minute, or how long it takes to get to that first $1 billion of sales, because there's no way that it just happens kind of magically. It's hard work and people pre-filling baskets and pre-order and pre-promotion. So my big prediction is that they'll get to $1 billion even quicker than before, and the sales period is going to be even longer than it was last year.
Okay, well, we'll hold you to that, Jack. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Much appreciated. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. Well, we have almost come to the end of this section. And this session, I told you, was going to be very fast and furious. 60 minutes. Please do join us for session 2, which takes place on Wednesday, the 30th of September. And that will be an hour session where you can really get rapidly immersed in all things Alibaba. That will be led by Alibaba and senior Alibaba team, so you can really get and understand what the Alibaba ecosystem is and how you can take advantage of that as well. So on behalf of myself and David Lloyd from Alibaba, thank you very much indeed for joining. I'm just going to leave you with this, which is, we've talked about the opportunities for foreign brands in China. We also talked about the growing emergence of Chinese brands. So for those of you that can spare a few minutes, it takes about 8 minutes. So if you've got a few minutes after the official finish of this, please do watch. And I want to leave you and play us out with a video that looks at the top 100 most valuable Chinese brands as seen through the eyes of our Brandsy top 100 most valuable Chinese brands. And there you can get a really good understanding of what are the big brands, how large they are in terms of value, and which sectors they operate in, because some of these will be brands that you will be competing on. So to play us out, let's look at the top 100 most valuable global brands for 2019. The 2018 results will be launched in a few weeks' time in Beijing, in Shanghai, for an event for all of our WPP clients and colleagues. If anybody wants details of that, please send me an email, david.roth@wpp.com, and we'll be delighted to send you details. But for the intervening period, until we get the new numbers, here we are, the Brandsy top 100 most valuable Chinese brands. To play us out, a big thank you to Alibaba, our partners in this webinar and the next two. We look very much forward to seeing you next Wednesday. But for me, David Roth, here in my home office in Pinner in London, thanks very much indeed for joining us.